So I accidentally deleted my text graphics from my last videos, so I will be using new text graphics prematurely, and I'll go ahead and add a new beginning picture. Also, I will be covering more chapters hopefully in the future than in Genesis 1 through 4 because it'll be, I think, much less analyzing. So, without further ado, let's get started. Genesis 7, verse 6. Now Noah was 600 years old when the flood of water came upon the earth. So, when Noah became 600 years old, Earth revolutions around the sun, the first rain ever fell on the earth, and it was to be the global flood. Noah being 600 years old, by the way, is the equivalent of him being born in the year 1414, and in the year 2014 the flood begins. Just put that into perspective, how healthy the original bodies were. Verse 7, Then Noah, his sons, and his wife, and his sons' wives with him entered the ark because of the water of the flood. Everyone in the ark was Noah, his 3 sons, his wife, his son's wife, and the animals. You're probably aware of that already if you've watched the last video, but just to make sure that you're aware of that. Verse 8, Of clean animals and animals that are not clean, and birds and everything that creeps on the ground. Okay, animals that can be used as offerings and animals that cannot be used as offerings is basically what clean animals and not clean animals are. Clean animals are the only ones that can be used as an offering, and we'll get into the reasons why that is later on. Verse 9, There went into the ark to Noah by twos, male and female, as God had commanded Noah. Okay, verse 9, The animals went into the ark and directly to Noah by twos, just like in chapter 6, verse 20. Verse 10, It came about after the 7 days that the water of the flood came upon the earth. So, the 7 days that he's referring to was the 7 days mentioned by God in verse 4 above. We covered that in the last video. Verse 11, In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, just like the same way we keep our calendar today, on the same day all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were opened. The fountains of the great deep are referring to what was mentioned in chapter 2, verse 6. It said, A mist used to rise from the earth and water the whole surface of the ground. What happened was the original form of irrigating the vegetation was not rain like today, but a mist would rise from the ground, kind of like a fountain, and would put mist over all the vegetation on the earth. And what happened in verse 11 with the flood, the fountains of the great deep, they burst open. They just absolutely, all the water in them came out. And at the same time, the floodgates of the sky were opened. The floodgates of the sky has been interpreted in 2 popular ways. One popular view is that there was an incredible downpour of rainfall, and that this floodgates of the sky were basically just rain. It's a way to emphasize how much rain was falling. Another popular view is that the sky contained an ocean of water, and it fell on this day. Like, there's many people who believed that in early Earth history, the sky held literal oceans of water. And this is actually a popular view within conservative cultures of biblical scholarship, and they believe that what happened is all these oceans fell right here, and that was one of the reasons why the rain was so intense. And it's also possible that something in between, that there was more water in the atmosphere prior to this, and less, and after Noah's flood there was less water in the atmosphere, and we have no idea how to verify the truth of either of these. Nobody was filming a video camera at this time. Nobody has any pictures, so we'll have to find out after our deaths. But unless some other scientific evidence can find ways to observe the difference. So, but we're going to say that it's rain, because that's what I think. And it also fits the context of the next verse. The rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. Verse 12. Another reason why I think it's rain. The duration of the rain was 40 days and 40 nights. And you've probably heard that before. It's very popular, 40 days and 40 nights. Verse 13. On the very same day, Noah and Shem and Ham and Japheth, the sons of Noah, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons with them, entered the ark. Okay. Let's see. I'm going to read verse 14 too. They and every beast of its kind, and all the cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth after its kind, and every bird after its kind, all sorts of birds. Okay. I remember that I had not yet identified what Noah's sons meant. I think in the last chapter I thought I had already explained that, but I had not. So real quick, Shem means name, Ham means hot, Japheth means opened, and I have no idea what the significance of these names are. The animals mentioned in 14 are all land animals. It talks about the birds, the creeping things, all the cattle. These are all land animals that were given the privilege of being on the ark. They will survive and will repopulate the earth with their offspring. Verse 15. So they went into the ark to Noah by twos of all flesh, in which was the breath of life. The word flesh here is distinct from the aquatic life when it says two of all flesh, which was the breath of life. It's distinct from the fish and the mammals in the sea, which did not all perish because of this great judgment. And it's distinct because it is distinct in verse 21, and we'll read that in a second. Verse 16. Those that entered, male and female of all flesh, entered as God had commanded him, and the Lord closed it behind him. Huge text that is easy to miss. The Lord closed it. It is the door. chapter 6, verse 16, behind him, and him is Noah. Noah did not close the door, but God did. God closed the door. It's pretty cool. And later on, Jesus will identify himself as the door. I'm not sure if it directly ties into the context of Jesus is identifying himself as the door of the ark, or if it's just very characteristic of God being the door of salvation again, to avoid his judgment. But this is definitely consistent with the rest of biblical scripture. Verse 17, then the flood came upon the earth for 40 days, and the water increased and lifted up the ark so that it rose above the earth. The water prevailed and increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. Verse 19, the water prevailed more and more upon the earth, so that all the high mountains everywhere under the heavens were covered. So it goes on and on and on about how massive the flood is, how it covers all the land. This is absolutely not a local flood, as many people try to argue. This is clearly a global, worldwide flood. In verse 20, the water prevailed 15 cubits higher, which we explained what a cubit was in the last video, and the mountains were covered. All flesh that moved on the earth perished, birds and cattle and beasts and every swarming thing that swarms upon the earth, and all of mankind, all of the wicked mankind that we learned about in chapter 6, they all died. Of all, verse 22, of all that was on the dry land, all in whose nostrils was the breath of the Spirit of life, died. They all died. And I think the reason this text keeps repeating itself over and over again is because of the seriousness of this judgment. We go on and on and on about how massive the water was, how it just overtook the dry land and every living creature other than aquatic creatures and those on the ark. They all died. Just a massive judgment. In verse 23, thus he blotted out every living thing that was upon the face of the land, from man to animals to creeping things and to birds of the sky, and they were blotted out from the earth. And only Noah was left together with those that were with him in the ark. The water prevailed upon the earth 150 days. Okay. Although the rain itself was for 40 days and 40 nights, it takes another 110 days before the massive amount of rain recedes. So, this is also further evidence that the concept of early Genesis writings understood that the world was round and not flat, because it would have been completely impossible for a flat earth to take 110 days to recede. This is clearly, in order for evaporation to take place, in order for the water to be put back where it belongs, go back into the earth and into the sky, it takes 110 days, where it's not just compiled upon the earth. And we're going to cover chapter 8 as well today, so let's go through that. In verse 1, but God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the cattle that were with him in the ark. And God caused a wind to pass over the earth, and the water subsided. So, in verse 1, God's wrath is ended as he remembers Noah. And this continues to show God in an expressive way. The reason why God's wrath ended is because of Noah and the other creatures on the ark. And God speeds up the evaporation process, which is one of the ways to get the water away from the earth and get it back to where it is supposed to be, not completely engulfing the earth. He speeds up the evaporation process by sending a wind to pass over the earth. And you can look it up if you want to. The flow rate of air is well known to heavily affect the evaporation process. Verse 2, also the fountains of the deep and the floodgates of the sky were closed, and the rain from the sky was restrained. So, the water sources that we read about in just a few minutes ago in the last chapter, they were all closed. And this is at the end of the 40 days. We still have 110 days of the water needing to recede in order for it to be back to where it used to be. Verse 3, and the water receded steadily from the earth, and at the end of 150 days the water decreased. In the 7th month, on the 7th day of the month, the ark rested upon the mountains of Ararat. Ararat means the curse reversed, or the precipitation of curse. This is the reason why the mountain range has the name today. It is also a mountainous region of eastern Armenia, between the river Araxes and the lakes Van and Oruma. The air would have been surprisingly thick, which is one of the things when I was reading this, I was curious what the living conditions would have been on the ark, as the water would have raised them above Mount Everest, above the highest thing on the earth. I thought they would be gasping for breath because I thought the air must have been so thin. But when we think about especially when we think about people with oxygen masks climbing mountains like Mount Everest, or when they're flying in an airplane, they need oxygen. The air would have been thick because the air near the surface, which is in this case where the water is thicker because the weight of all the air above it is being pushed down by gravity. So all the air at the surface where we are is where the thickest air is. So where we live today is where the thickest air is because we're at the bottom. Where Noah would have been, he would have also been at where the surface is, at the bottom. So he would have had the same thickness of air we have today, which I thought was pretty cool. Genesis 8, verse 5, the water decreased steadily until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first day of the month, the tops of the mountains became visible. So, we just recently had, a few months ago, we had the ark resting on a mountain. I'm not really sure where it is on the mountain, possibly at the top of a mountain, and now the tops of the mountains become visible. It's not really clear how much of the tops become visible. When I read this, I think that if you were to look outside the ark, at the surrounding land masses, you would see the tops of mountains, and that would be the first land masses you would see. And when I'm reading this, that's what I think is what it's referring to. Um, I'm not sure the portion of the land that becomes visible at this point. Clearly, from the time the ark hits the mountain, very soon after that, you will start to see some land. The very tip top of the mountain is going to be visible, but I think at this point, clearly the tops of the mountain are visible. I kind of like to be analytical and try to understand exactly what the verse is saying. Verse 6, then it came about at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made. Verse 6, after 40 days the rain stopped, so at this point he can open the window without any worry of water getting inside the ark. Verse 7, and he sent out a raven, and it flew here and there until the water was dried up from the earth. So Noah let the raven go, and it flew away, and it came back probably for food and probably for some. Maybe we had the ground on the ark was the best. I'm not really sure what the moisture or the erosion would have been like on the tips of these mountains. Perhaps it was just more enjoyable for the raven to be on the ark. I'm not really sure. I don't know what it's like for something to be covered in water for months. I don't know. Maybe you can look that up and see. I do have some kind of a life. I don't want to conduct these kind of experiments. Verse 8, then he sent out a dove from him to see if the water was abated from the face of the land. Abated could also mean to be slight. So he went out to see if the water was to be slight in the face of the land. So water not completely gone, but much less as the water still removing from the earth. Clearly the earth has been radically transformed from all this water, all this erosion. You have things like the Grand Canyon now. I don't know if there was mountains before, but maybe mountains have been created from all this cataclysmic disaster. We're not really sure. Whatever it is, the dove won't even land on the ground, and there's also no food to eat yet. I'm not really sure what vegetation is being grown at this point. If seeds have been planted from the seeds that have of the plants that had recently died, but there's likely some vegetation that are in the process of growing, but there's nothing near what the dove can rely on yet. So the dove comes back in verse 9. The dove found no resting place for the sole of her foot. So she returned to him into the ark, for the water was on the surface of all the earth. Then he put out his hand and took her and brought her into the ark himself. So the dove would rather be in the ark than in the current condition of the land. Now, when it says the water was on the surface of all the earth, it doesn't mean that every piece of the earth was still submerged with water, but still a massive significance of the water of the earth is still submerged with water as it's receding. Also notice the care Noah has for the creature as he puts out his hand, takes the dove, and brings it into the ark. It's such a wonderful thing to see, especially when you know that man was originally created to care for these creatures. We were to be, we were supposed to rule over them in a compassionate way. And it's enjoyable seeing Noah having this great example, especially after seeing all the sin in the last chapters. Verse 10, so he waited yet another 7 days, just like the work week established in the first chapter of Genesis. And again he sent out the dove from the ark. The dove came to him toward evening, and behold, in her beak was a freshly picked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the water was abated from the earth. At this point, the dove came back with a little bit of vegetation, an olive, likely from a very, very young olive tree that had grown. It might have been growing earlier than that, but at this point, a little bit of vegetation, a lot of sprouting had taken place, so it was enough for the bird to have a little bit to eat, and it's a sign to Noah that conditions are becoming survivable, I guess, at this point. Verse 12, then he waited yet another 7 days and sent out the dove, but she did not return to him again. So, at this point, the dove no longer has any reason to come back to the ark, because the dove can get whatever she wants away from the ark, and now Noah knows that it is okay for him to leave the ark for the same reasons. Verse 13 and 14. Now it came about in the 601st year, in the first month, on the first of the month, that the water was dried up from the earth. Then Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the surface of the ground was dried up. In the 7th month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dry. Little by little, from the highest elevations to the lowest elevations, the earth has finally dried up. Maybe things aren't exactly the way it is today, but things are a lot better than it was. And it's probably a very big sign of relief for Noah that the judgment is about to be over, or is looking a little, there's the light at the end of the tunnel, I guess. In verse 15 through 19, then God spoke to Noah, saying, go out of the ark, you and your wife, and your sons wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing of all flesh that is with you, birds and animals, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, that they may breed abundantly on the earth, and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. So Noah went out, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him. Every beast, every creature, creeping thing, and every bird, everything that moves on the earth went out by their families from the ark. So, Noah does not even leave the ark until he's commanded. God commands that all creatures leave the ark so that they can breed and refill the earth. And we continuously read the same context over and over again when the author identifies the people on the ark and identifies the creatures on the ark, so that you know that isn't including the same group of people. So there can be no miscommunication when we're reading this. In verse 20, then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took off of every clean animal and of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. So, only the clean creatures were sacrificed. This, like Genesis chapter 3, when God sacrificed God sacrificed the animals in front of Adam, and when Abel in Genesis chapter 4 sacrificed the lambs, this is also pointing towards Christ being the sacrifice for sins. This is a sign of God's providing the sacrifice. I don't know how much Noah understood about this, but he clearly did the right thing. After the judgment is over, Noah avoids the judgment because of the sacrifice of Christ. Noah and his family avoids judgment just like we will avoid judgment in the end because of the sacrifice of Christ. In verse 21, it works because the Lord smelled the smoothing aroma, and the Lord said to himself, I will never again curse the ground on account of man, for the intent of man's heart is evil from his youth, and I will never again destroy every living thing as I have done. The Lord was obviously pleased with the sacrifice when he says the smoothing aroma. He makes a promise never to judge the ground on account of man. The ground was cursed because of man's dependent on the ground to survive. Thus, the ground became collateral damage, just like the animals. God will never again destroy every living thing as he did with the flood. The creatures, like the animals, were also collateral damage. I'm not sure that the second group. I think the second group includes humans, but I don't think it's trying to be specific one way or the other. But God promises never to send this massive judgment on the earth again. God acknowledges that man is evil from his youth, but he will give grace in the future and not destroy the earth as he did during this judgment. In verse 22, while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. All these natural laws that are in place today, God is going to continue to let them have through grace because of this promise he made to Noah. And as we continue to read through the Bible, man continues to become corrupt. However, God never again wipes out the earth as he did here. Well, there are many objections to this when it comes to science of today. The majority of it comes from a well-known scholar in the mid-19th century named Charles Lyell. Charles Lyell wrote a book that Charles Darwin, the person who was the most popular in creating evolution that we have today, he wrote a book that Charles Darwin was reading as he was going to the Galapagos Islands to establish his theory. Charles Lyell had a principle that is used today called uniformitarianism. Uniformitarianism is a concept that is very heavily used in science today, which basically says whatever the world is doing now, it has always done. It's ironic because in the last verse we just read, we see that whatever things are happening now is because of God's grace. He allows them to continue to happen. But with Charles Lyell, he knew that he could increase the amount of scientific theories that we produced if we held to the principle that we built our understanding of what happened in the past based upon what happened today. And he created many theories of the age of the earth. His theory was that it was millions of years old. I think modern secular scientists would say about 4 billion years old, which is vastly different than most creationists who would say that it's between 6,000 and 7,000 years old. But the secular scientists build their understanding of the world on Charles Lyell's uniformitarianism. There is no instrument that we can use to go back and know how old the world is. Nobody lives 600 years old anymore, or 900 years old, like many of the people in Genesis. So we're just forced to kind of use what we have today. This concept of uniformitarianism is a heavy assumption, which is a desperate attempt to establish theories when there's no additional evidence and no additional data. It is just a principle like Occam's razor or anything like that that seeks to help establish more theories. And I don't think I think the basis of many of these scientific theories that do object to the Bible are filled with assumptions. And I think if you go to Answers in Genesis, I think they solve many of them much better than I could, because they have teams of scientists who do that all the time. And it's also interesting, the role reversal. It's so fascinating when you read the Bible, when you see role reversals. You have Saul becoming Paul. You have Moses, which we will talk about later, who once defended one of his Hebrew people, and then he turns around and leads them out of Egypt. And we saw Noah, who once tilled the ground, and now he will repopulate the ground with all land animals, and who he carried with him, as well as with people. And that is all I have for today. And we will get to Genesis chapter 9 next time, and hopefully we'll continue to fly through the chapter as we did today, because it's a lot more, it's a lot less analyzing than Genesis chapter 1 through chapter 4 was. And hopefully we'll be able to get maybe 2 or 3 chapters at a time from here on out. Okay, thank you for listening. Bye.